All right. Well, I get to do the introduction as I ended the podcast last night with John Weeks. This is one of the only men under the age of 40 that I pay any attention to, that I put any amount of of emphasis on the words that comes out of his mouth. This is Mr. Jay Burden, one of the youngsters in the movement, and you're doing great work, man. And I mean it. There's not a lot of guys out there that I listen to that don't have a lot of world experience, but you're out there, you're doing good work.
Well, thanks, man. I really appreciate that.
For sure, brother. So we were kind of like BSing behind the scenes about the stuff we want to talk about. Let's catch up on what's going on with the Iran war. What do you make about this back and forth that Trump is having between? It's almost like he's playing like this middle ground between Israel and Iran, and he can't get the two sides to agree. He wants to pacify Iran and end the war, but Israel is making it extremely difficult on him.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's a fair reading. I'm going to completely and wholeheartedly endorse something that John Podhoretz said, which is a rare occurrence. And he said today, we have lost the Iran war. Now, of course, there is them being neocons, no sense of self reflection of, hey guys, didn't you screech about how we had to get involved in this war? And now you get to present yourself as the analyst saying, no, I don't think it was a good idea. It's like, well, John, you and your boys, you're the reason, right? But fundamentally, when I say we lost the war, look, this doesn't look like losing World War II with
Mm.
nukes dropped in two of your cities or your whole country getting sort of socially engineered out of existence. It's not that, but it is a loss. We are unable to accomplish the goals, whatever those goals were. That was kind of a changeable definition. When we're unable to actually get it across the finish line, so we lost. And seemingly, Trump's primary concern now is opening the Strait of Hormuz. There's kind of a secondary concern about the Iranian nuclear program. To what degree that is a legitimate threat is open for debate. But nonetheless, that seems to be the objective. And to put it bluntly, if you're suing for the status quo ante, if you just want everything to go back to how it was before the war, you're not winning. Right?
Hmm.
That's not the guy who has the upper hand, who's in a position of strength, not the position he takes. Obviously, bringing Iran and Israel to the table is going to be difficult. A large part of the reason it's going to be difficult is that we have, to say alienated Iran is perhaps an understatement. We have, and our allies have routinely used negotiations as a cover for attacks. That's happened in this war. Of course, it's happened to, member or representatives of Iran, representatives of Hamas, which is obviously deeply connected to Iran, even outside of the bounds of the Iranian Republic. Right, there was a strike in Qatar. So, point is, when we're talking about the difficulties of bringing Iran to the table, there are really two separate difficulties, which is one, getting them to sit down in the first place and actually talk things out. Because that sort of, I guess, general understanding that if you agree to a talk, you're going to stop fighting, or at least you're not going to attack the people that you have said, hey, let's talk it out. We violated that. And understandably, the Iranians are cautious because, let's be honest, we've killed quite a lot of their leadership, obviously including the Ayatollah himself. So that's part of it. And I think another one is that the Iranians seem to realize the position they're in, which is they have the upper hand here, and they're making us hurt. Sure, obviously the pace of the conflict has decreased. We're not launching nearly the kind of ordinance we were 6 months ago. But fundamentally, Trump is in a bad spot domestically. He will very likely face mounting political pressure to solve this. And I don't pretend to know what's happening inside Iran, but it seems as if they've made the calculation that they can wait.
Mm.
They've already gained an immense amount of power when it comes to controlling the strait. That is now theirs, one way or another. And fundamentally, I think that there's part of it that they just enjoy watching us squirm. And I can't really blame them for it. I think that's very understandable, very human. And then as far as the Israelis, if I can be blunt about it, who the hell knows, man? They seem to be irrational, like just completely and totally frothing at the mouth, insane.
Right.
Just look at figures like Podhoretz, obviously seemingly contradicting themselves. And so those two parties are not going to want to come to a conclusion. I think that Trump perhaps genuinely does want a resolution, but at a certain point, he can't make them agree to stop fighting. Now, it is entirely possible that a wedge will be driven between us and Tel Aviv. And when I say entirely possible, I don't mean likely. I mean that is a mathematical possibility. Such a thing could happen. But realistically, that seems to be the problem, that we are waging this war for someone else and for someone else's benefit. And if we're talking about Trump's domestic woes, you have two things. One, of course, we have the midterms coming up. I'm not going to forecast what will happen, although Trump is at a historically low approval rating. He's suffering among demographics that he won with in 24, young men, guys under 30, guys under 40, but also white non-college educated voters, sort of his core base. And is that because there are guys out in the oil field talking about the Greater Israel Project and all this sort of stuff? No, I doubt it. And maybe oil fields wasn't the best comparison, but they're kind of blue collar guys who brought Trump into office. Not necessarily. But when you got in as basically a protest candidate, when you got in as a way for people to express the fact that they were unhappy with Biden, they were unhappy with how bad the economy was, when you promised them a golden age, and seemingly your entire administration has been dominated by a foreign war most people don't particularly care about, which has hurt people at the pump, which has hurt people when they go to buy groceries. And we can get into the specific economics. I say we can. One could. I don't know anything about economics. But I think for a lot of people, they basically look at that and they're like, well, dude, what the heck? Come on, you said you were going to make it better. And not only did you not make it better, you made it worse.
Right.
For no reason. You picked a fight with Iran on behalf of someone else. And look, I don't think this is going to be the same shutout that we saw, in 2018, a blue wave, for a couple different reasons. One, Republicans have played electoral politics well. They are benefiting from redistricting in a way that the DNC is not. The DNC is hurting financially in a way that the Republicans are not. And let's also be honest, Republican AGs have been able to get a lot done as far as cleaning up voter counts. Now, Trump lost the SAVE Act. That's going to hurt him for two reasons. One, the actual nuts and bolts of voting, but also it's sort of symbolic of all the things he tried to get done and didn't. So I think it's up in the air, to what degree the two chambers go blue. They will certainly move that direction. It's also important to bring up that the Democrats are facing a number of, and this is going back 2 or 3 years, a number of different retirements, deaths, and other things affecting their kind of top line leaders. Now, obviously, Lindsey Graham is dead, but South Carolina is so solidly red that functionally it doesn't matter in the same way some of these other seats or some of these other states do. So the only reason I'm bringing that up is that there is a narrative on the more distant side of politics that Trump is going to get crushed in 28. That he's going to be forced to have to learn the consequences. And I would like that to be the case. I think that that would be good to basically, show that there are consequences to this sort of action. But I think it's entirely possible, even if it's a little uncomfortable to think about, that he might skate. He might be able to avoid a lot of the externalities. Maybe not all of them, but if he holds on to the Senate and loses the House, sure, he's not in the position he's in now, but the chances of him going to jail or getting, hit with some sort of massive investigation is comparatively smaller. And I think that's a big part of the frustration many people have had with regards to this war, is that the whole time myself and others have been saying, hey, this is going to waste a ton of political capital. make people mad at the Republican Party and mad at the president for reasons whether legitimate or not. And guess what? The Democrats said they're going to send you to The Hague. Now, okay, maybe they don't actually send, Pete Hegseth to The Hague and try him as a war criminal, but they've indicated at least that they're coming to get you. They did it last time, especially when, and I'm sure you've heard these same rumors, and when I say rumors, I can't prove them, but I'm hearing them from many different people who, have inside access and are not the sort of people to reflexively hate Donald Trump, that the level of corruption in his second administration is off the charts. And if he got hit with a $500 million settlement because of a minor accounting error for a form he didn't prepare, well, if he's actually done something, he's probably going to get got for it. And let's be honest, even if he hasn't actually done anything, they're going to get him anyway. So who cares? And this goes back to that kind of opening salvo about John Podhoretz, which is, I think, one of the major flaws, consistent flaws in the president's reasoning or in his political acumen, is his ability to pick allies. That's not a particularly hot take, especially as regards the first term. But the fact that he took the counsel of men like John Podhoretz, that he took the counsel of men like Mark Levin, and we are seeing in real time them turn on him, right? We're seeing that those loyalties were fleeting. And look, I say this, like, I'm not a MAGA guy. I wouldn't even consider myself a Republican per se. But at a certain point, even if you hate the fighter, you've got to recognize a good game plan or a bad game plan, right? You got to call balls and strikes here. And I think that's what makes this so frustrating, is that seemingly this whole war has turned out to be a massive disaster for America. And let's be honest, hasn't particularly helped out Israel. Now, that wouldn't make me like it if Israel was getting everything they've wanted. But it does sort of bring up a really important question. Why are we even doing this? Because seemingly it has only made things worse for really everyone involved other than the Iranians. And I certainly have my sympathies for the Iranian people, getting 200 girls blown up, because of, arrogant U.S., intelligence decisions. That would make me mad. But I'm not an Iranian patriot. I don't particularly care about Iran. And if I had a choice between starting this war, empowering Iran, and $4 gas, or not doing any of those, that's what I would have chosen. So that's a very long answer, Tommy, to your question, but that's kind of my reading on the current situation.
No, that's good. You said a few things I want to cover there. It's funny though, because the night before the war with Iran started, I was actually texting with Kyle Matovic, and we were texting back and forth about the possibilities of going to war. And I was like, dude, I don't see the benefit. I don't see the positive to it. I don't think it's going to benefit Trump in any way. And if there's anything we can say about Donald Trump, the one thing he is most worried about, concerned with, is his legacy and the way that people view him, especially after he leaves office. He wants to be remembered as one of the greatest presidents in history. And I was like, it's just, there's nothing beneficial to him going into this war. It's going to be a total disaster if he does it. So I don't foresee him doing it, because he will be getting the council of generals that don't want anything to do with a war with Iran, and they understand how terrible this is going to end up. And the next morning, I woke up and I saw the news, and I just texted Kyle. I said, "Well, I was wrong," and just went to work. I had to go to work, and it wasn't. What was it? Within 2 weeks, so after Trump had come into office, I saw gas go down from it was like here in Southeast Texas, it was like I want to say it was right around 293, 294 a gallon when Trump came into office. Within a month, it was down under $2.25 a gallon. So I work about an hour and a half away from my house. So I'm putting fuel in my little truck every 2 days. I was putting in about $23 to $24 every 2 days to get back and forth to work. And today, where with fuel prices over $3.20 a gallon, I'm putting in over $45 every 2 days. And so it has significantly impacted the way that normal people are living. And I have noticed that working as in the blue collar fields with around these people, the working man and the people that typically don't pay attention to politics on any sort of level like you or I typically would, they are more readily speaking about Israel in a negative fashion today than I've ever heard in my life.
Yeah, I
Before,
mean,
it would have been unheard
100%.
of. It would have been unheard of a couple of years ago for somebody to bring up another country in regards to our foreign policy decisions. And now it's like right there, it's right on the tip of everybody's tongue. It's entered the ether and there is no undoing it.
Yeah, and I mean the conservative, I wouldn't even say the conservative establishment because it runs through obviously the kind of Fox News crowd, but also a lot of the, MAGA Inc. people, uh, is to basically go full on frontal assault on any sort of criticism. So, for instance, you mentioned the episode I did with about Jeremy Boring and Rod Dreher, and I look okay. Obviously, I have strong feelings about Dreher on a personal as well as a political level. I'll set that aside. But what's interesting about that framing is effectively they characterize the concerns predominantly among young people, but if you look at the data on who is unhappy, it's not just Zoomers. So I wrote a piece for Chronicles a while back where I sort of broke down the data on this using specifically the Thomas Massie primary, right? And look, if you look at the top line data, Thomas Massie lost. Ed Gowron will be running for the Republican Party. And it was 9 points, so pretty significant. But you've got to remember who votes in primaries. It's old people, to be honest. Mm-hmm. And if you broke down voting patterns by age, Thomas Massie won every demographic under 55 by double digits, some as many as 30%. And okay, yeah, Gowron got the 55 plus crowd, which was enough to take him over in the raw numbers. But that race, what is it on? Okay, sure. Is it on, Thomas Massie being kind of annoying sometimes and, calling out the sitting president? Was that going to require a response from the party? Was he going to get replaced? 100%, man. Like, regardless of your opinions, like if your boss is cheating on his wife and you walk in and yell that at the company picnic, you're going to get fired, regardless of if that's true or not, or if that needed to be made known. So again, I don't want anyone to read me as like a Massie partisan. Something like that was going to happen no matter what. But if you look at really what that race was about, functionally, it was about our relationship to Israel.
Yeah.
Look at how much money Ed Gowron got from the usual suspects. Look at what Massie was saying about the war. Look at what Massie was saying about the Epstein files, which, while they have faded into the background, are still very much alive in the public consciousness. Mm-hmm. And you look at that and you're like, okay, this isn't just guys under 30. This isn't just lunatics on the internet. This isn't just, groypers, a term that has sort of risen to prominence as kind of a slur for, anyone who isn't, a Donald Trump, Israel-loving sycophant. So the way that this issue, this dual issue of affordability in Israel, because let's be honest, they are linked, certainly in the public mind, but also why is everything so expensive? Well, the war at Iran is a big part of that. Not all, to be fair, but a major contributing feature of it. Also, of course, we have the kind of front end issue of hiring and firing, whether that's H-1Bs or just the unwillingness of corporate America to hire straight white guys. You have this immense amount of discontent. And I'm noticing the same thing you are. It's not like I'm only picking this up on the internet. I've had to budget a lot more tightly than I normally do. Mm-hmm. I drive, a giant 30-year-old Toyota, so it's not great on gas, which means relatively marginal increases. I feel them, let alone, basically going up by over $1 a gallon. And the response from that kind of conservative establishment, MAGA Inc., whatever you want to call that block, the non-dissident part of the right wing, has basically been to attack those guys. It's for character assassination. So the easiest framing to identify is the woke right. Mm-hmm. The idea that, oh, if you're calling our relationship to Israel into question, if you are unhappy with anything that can be identified as systemic, well, you're a mirror image to the college SJW. You know, the blue-haired, problem glasses, wearing woman from 2016 that you saw Ben Shapiro destroy in the pixelated sunglasses, you know, edit on to the image afterwards. Because, and this is their argument, you don't have a concept of personal responsibility. You think it's all someone else who's ruined your day. And so you're entitled, right? You think that you just deserve whatever the issue is at hand. And understandably, that's making people really mad because, again, this recently flared up over a conversation that a TPUSA guy was having with a college student. Innocuous little message where this kid said, I don't know, man, I just feel like burritos shouldn't cost $20. Okay, what is that worth? It's an anecdote, right? Is the kid actually bringing out a calculator and figuring out how much a burrito costs? No, it's a round number, whatever. Mm-hmm. But of course, you get all of these responses in the same vein as the woke right criticism. It's the connection. Basically saying, oh, young people are so entitled. They think they deserve a burrito. Don't you know you can make a burrito cheaper at home? It's like, yeah, man. Yeah, no, thank you. We figured out how to cook. We understand that.
Right.
But, right, the idea is, oh, you're stupid. You're wrong. You feel like you deserve a burrito. And one, I don't think that's the feeling that most people have. You know, I certainly eat out from time to time if family's coming through or it's a special occasion, but it's far from every meal I eat. But the criticism put forward by that college student is a pretty basic one. That, hey, something that used to be really normal is now becoming more of a decision, right? Yep. It's gone from being something that, like, when I was in high school, I'd go and grab, some cheap food from Taco Bell, and my order was almost exactly, because, again, I did this a dozen times, $5.18.
Yep.
If I wanted to remake that order now, it's like $10.
Yes.
So you look at that and you're like, okay, I can run the math on what inflation should be, which is, to be fair, not all Donald Trump's fault, but let's also be honest, a large part of it is. And that should be more expensive, but it shouldn't be double. And again, when you were a president who came in and sold this as a golden age, the new golden age for America, we're back, we're going to be richer than ever. And you're not only not richer, you haven't stayed the same, but you feel like you're poorer than you were in high school, at least functionally. You feel like you have to be more careful that something as cheap as like shitty Mexican food is becoming, if not a luxury, at least something you have to think about.
Right.
That rankles people. And I don't think that is, this sort of lack of personal accountability. It's like, no, I get it. I could have made some decisions in my life that would have paid off better or worse for me. I'm not saying that every American has a birthright of a certain amount of shitty Mexican food every year. But fundamentally, it feels like this system isn't being run for my benefit. It feels like I'm getting screwed. And if the response is basically, oh, you're a communist, it's like, well, one, no, I'm not. Shut up. And also, there are people in this country, like if we're talking about other, kind of news stories, the rise of the Democratic Socialists, the DSA, the kind of left-wing insurgency, they don't have good answers, right? You and I both know socialism doesn't work, especially in the sense that these people are talking about it.
Right.
But if you have one block in politics that's saying, oh, you're worried about affordability, what are you, an idiot? What are you, a communist? And then another group saying, yeah, we'll fix it. Well, where are people going to go? And even if they decide, hey, yeah, I'm not going to vote for some, Pakistani Muslim with I'm not going to say something nasty about his wife, but a wife. Even if you're not that, you're like, I can't cross that aisle. Are you showing up to the polls? Are you going to pull the lever for a guy who promised you the moon and gave you $4 gas?
Right.
No. And that's entirely rational. And when you combine that with the very legitimate criticisms, the very legitimate questions people are asking about our relationship to Israel, based off of things such as, I don't know, the Secretary of State saying we started this war because of Israel.
Yeah.
And you're painted as both a communist, someone who doesn't have agency, someone who's too stupid to figure out how grocery stores work, let alone an oven. And then also you're attacked as, a racist anti-Semite who must be purged, who we have to get rid of. You're like, well, what are you offering me? Especially when so many of these conservatives cast themselves as principled liberals, cast themselves as the defenders of our constitutional order, who view the reason that they use this line of attack, the woke right, is that they say it is not merely the fact that they are insane race communists. That's not the only thing that's wrong. Their tactics, the way that they think, the things that they do to grab power, the cancellation, the denunciation, calling for people to disavow their friends, that's illegitimate. That's wrong. And if you're anything like that, you woke right, we have to throw you out. And then you turn around and you're like, wait a minute. You guys are doing the exact same things. You're calling on JD Vance. You're calling on all these people to be thrown out. And it's like, well, okay, apparently you have no principles. You have no ability to deliver on your promises. And seemingly you hate me and people like me more than almost anyone else. Yeah. More than you hate the communists, more than you hate the SJWs. And so, to be honest, man, it's a giant cluster, to be brutally honest about it. And, you and I are students of history and students of American political history. And if you've read any of the paleocons, if you've gone through the guys who got it right after the Cold War, who said, nope, we have to be a normal country again, right? The opposite side of the neoconservatives. There were the neocons and the paleocons. They fought it out, and we know who won. But you look at how they were canceled. You look at how they were smeared, and how we look at that argument. Who was right? It feels like we're sort of living through a similar thing, where these horrible monsters, these sort of butchers, these incompetent rubes, are trying to pull the same technique over again. They're trying to purge their own ranks. And I don't think it's going to work for any number of reasons. But yeah, that's sort of my read, I guess, on the affordability thing. It's incredibly disingenuous the way people are covering it, especially when you have the immense power of the Control F keyboard shortcut, and you can search these people's own writings for their comments on affordability 4 years ago. Yeah. So apparently then it was a massive crisis and a threat to the American way of life. Mm-hmm. But now it's completely off limits. And functionally, I think that we are watching a sort of split, an irreconcilable one within the kind of nominal right in America. And I don't think it had to happen. I think it was entirely possible for us to keep up that general feeling of, I guess that era of good feelings after the Trump win. But that required those major disagreements on foreign policy, on things like that, to be sidelined. Because let's be honest, if there wasn't a war raging in Iran, like, sure, you and I would still have our opinions on Israel, but would that matter in an electoral sense?
Right.
Probably not. It matters for me, but for, that guy who works with you, it's a background issue, functionally. Mm-hmm. But your opinion on Israel is a huge dividing line within, the right-wing bloc in America, as it is in the left. And because we've brought that to the bear, that crack has gone from being superficial to one that's completely and totally split that base. And I don't know if that is fixable in the short term, let alone the long term. Right. So sorry, Tommy, that's a massive rant from me. I'll give you a chance.
You're fine, dude. You got plenty to say, and I'm here for it. When you mentioned affordability, man, one of the things I was thinking of whenever you were talking about it was like, okay, So they gutted this country of the manufacturing industrial base of the country, turned us into a service economy, and now people can't afford the services. So what happens to the service economy, right? If there's no customer base that can be served by the service economy, then it's going to die too, right? And I was one of the things I've talked about several times because I've been driving truck for 23 years now, and damn, I'm almost 50, dude. This is crazy. Just a couple more years, and I'll be your grandpa. Um, and so in the 90s, I think I looked it up, and it was in like 1995. The average income of a truck driver, adjusted for inflation, was $110,000 in today's money. Today, the average truck driver makes $43,000. So when you're debasing the currency, you're debasing the skill market, you're taking away the money from the skills from those that can actually make the country run. You're taking their income by 60%, might I add. So you've debased their skills, you've debased the currency, and now you're sitting there demonizing this coming generation that's coming into the workforce saying, wait a minute, we can't survive. We're expected to be worse off for the first time than the generation before us. For the first time in American history, the next generation's expected to be worse off than the prior generation. We're expected to not, to own nothing and be happy is basically what these people are saying, right? They're taking the Klaus Schwab model and saying you're going to own nothing and you're going to be happy. Eat the bugs, you know? And that was a meme for a reason because people could see the reality of this world, this life that was promised to them crumbling before their eyes. And I mean, I'm 46 years old. My wife and I have we're not wealthy by any stretch of the imagination. Don't tell her that because she's from a third world nation and she believes that we're rich. And her standard on that matter is we can eat whatever we want, whenever we want, and not have to worry about it. And that's, the perspectives are different when you come from a background like South Africa compared to, growing up in America in the 1990s. Well, but we don't go out to eat that often. You were saying you don't go out to eat that often. We don't go out to eat that often because we know if her and I go out to eat, and if we're going to go and spend the time and money to go out to eat, we're going to make sure that the food that we are purchasing is from a restaurant that can actually make the food better than we can make it at home. If we could do it better at home, what's purpose in going out to eat it? So we're automatically lifting our standards a little bit. Well, that's our check comes out to be $100 between the two of us. If I go fishing on one of my days off, I'll spend 20, 30 bucks, between gas and bait and getting out, whatever I need, hooks. If I have to replace some hooks or leaders or whatever I have to replace, I'll spend 20, 30 bucks on that. And then on the way home afterwards, I'll be like, oh, okay, I want to stop and grab me a taco. And I'll sit down at this little taqueria in a little town close to me. I'll eat a couple of tacos, have some chips and salsa, maybe have a beer, and I'm looking at $40 after a tip, just for me. So the fact that people are complaining about the inflation and the decrease in our standard of living based upon the inflationary market and the debasing of the skills market, like it's actually a valid complaint. And Donald Trump, one of the things he promised was to address this whenever he came in, that we need to bring the manufacturing base back and repair the Rust Belt and bring back, the auto market to Michigan. Go ahead. You were about to say
Well,
something.
and no, and honestly, cars are another great way to examine this. So this is kind of a hobby horse of mine. Uh, the price of vehicles, both on the new and used market, has exploded. I did some rough math on this, and it's not exactly apples to apples, but if you could make basically if you could take a I think I used a 1985 Ford F-150 adjusted for inflation.
Hmm.
That'd be like $23,000. Okay, fair enough. It's a base model truck. The base model F-150 now is about double that.
Mm-hmm.
Round numbers, of course. But you look at that and you're like, okay, fine. Cars have gotten more expensive. There's more stuff on it. It's way more powerful. I get that. Well, what about used? Used cars have also gone up basically 2 to 3 times in relation to average American income.
Mm-hmm.
So this is another aspect, right? Your ability to do what you're supposed to, quote unquote, do, right? You're supposed to buy a good used car and drive it into the dirt. Well, one, we're not even talking about the difficulty of repairing and keeping a car running, which, look, there's a reason I drive a 30-year-old Toyota. Is because it is functionally easier to keep something with nearly 300,000 miles on it on the road than a new car with much less miles. Setting that aside. But even then, just talking about how much it costs to buy a used car, that's become a bigger part of your yearly budget, right? A bigger amount that you have to earmark for that. And when you say, well, that's basically what's happened to your car. That's what happened to your housing cost, whether it's your rent, whether it's your mortgage. That's what happened to your grocery bill. And you start to look at this and you're like, okay, well, everything is getting more expensive at the same time that wages are decreasing. And you look at this and you're like, well, sure. Are there guys who can beat the odds? Are there guys who can make that work and succeed and are, just doing awesome? 100%. But we're now talking about things that previously were assumed as being part of a basic facet of the American life. That if you weren't a massive fuck up, you weren't, a drunk, you weren't arrested, you could keep down a steady job, you'd have that. And we're seeing those things becoming luxuries. So I don't really try to avoid, going over kind of names in social media drama, but I thought this particular post by Seth Dillon of the Babylon Bee was kind of the perfect encapsulation of this. He was responding to a guy who was complaining about Elon Musk being the world's first trillionaire. I'll be honest, I don't really care that Elon Musk has $1 trillion. He makes rockets. If we're going to have a trillionaire, that's a cooler reason to be a trillionaire
Right.
than being some random banker. Fine, whatever. But this guy was saying, I'm 55 years old. I've worked since I was 15. I'll never own a house. And now we have a trillionaire. Complaining like, oh, that's so unfair.
Mm-hmm.
And all right, like, I don't agree with that specific element of it. But Seth Dillon quote tweets this and he's like, you know what? Mocking him. He's like, I've been playing tennis since I was 16. I never won a tournament. I don't have any professional sponsorships. And now some kid from Italy is the best player in the world. Isn't that unfair? Making fun of this guy. But here's the thing. Owning a house is not the same level of achievement as being a professional tennis player.
Right.
These are orders of magnitude different. Like my great grandmother, who recently passed away. She's married at 16. Her husband worked in the shipyards and died of shipyard related injuries 50 years ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
She owned a house. Her financial success is not equivalent to being the top tennis player in the world. That was a lower, that's a working class existence. She never had a lot of money. She had a lot of kids. It was, even at the time, not a prestigious job. But it was enough to own physical property, right? And so you look at that and you're like, well, so now we're taking something in living memory, right? Her children are still alive. And in that amount of time, this has gone from being something that, a widower could do. Someone who had a marginal pension from her husband's union could afford, to something that for people my age is a luxury. Look, the only reason I'm able to afford a house is because I'm renting out half of it. No way I'd be able to buy it. And there were some, advantages to that, right? Again, that is, that took a lot of doing. And you look at that, and if the messaging is sit down, shut up, and stop complaining, that's really tough. And look, I'm not a I'm not the kind of guy who believes the highest end of society or the highest end of human life is material satisfaction. Like if you and I were experiencing the same increases of cost of living for a different reason. Like for instance, you know what? If we were bringing manufacturing back, if that burrito was made by a guy supporting his family on it and it cost $20, you know what? Fair enough then, right? Okay, maybe I don't eat out as much, but when I do, at least it's going to a guy who can support his kids.
Right.
That would be worth it, right? You'd understand you were getting something for it and maybe you didn't have as much stuff, but at least society was healthier. No. The quality of even these cheap services has gone massively down.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much anecdotal evidence on this. Like, for instance, I don't know if anyone listening has ever rented a car, like on a Hertz, in the last 4 or 5 years. It's impossible, even when you've done everything, right? The caliber of people working there is horrible. The quality of service is horrible. And so you're looking at this and you're like, well, why is this happening? Why is everything so expensive? And yeah, 100%. A lot of it has to do with COVID inflation. But functionally, a lot of it was a relatively recent choice when it comes to the Iran war. And also, if we're talking about entitlements, let's be honest, the fact that effectively we are groaning under the weight of boomer luxury communism. A phrase that I stole. It's the name of a great article in the American Mind. I referenced it enough. Pete finally decided to do a reading. So for anyone who's illiterate at home, I guess I was going to say you should Google boomer luxury communism on Pete Quinones, but if you're illiterate, you probably can't spell that. Point is, Pete Quinones did a reading of it. Even if you don't want to read it, he goes through it. And the amount, Tommy, that you and I are paying for things like Social Security, that we're paying for Medicaid, at a time where, look, like I'm getting crushed by medical bills for routine, normal things, right? Again, the kind of like ancillary things that happen, not even like someone's sick, just the things you need to do in the course of your life. And you're looking at it and you're like, well, wait a minute. I'm not saying that I'm entitled to free healthcare, but we have free healthcare, but only for some people. We have communism. And so people like you and I are basically stuck in the worst of both worlds. It's the free market for us when we're paying. And then, communism when we're stuck on the worst ends of both systems.
Yeah.
Sorry, I could have said that more elegantly, but you see.
Yeah, no, but it's the free market for the poorest and communism for the wealthiest. Yeah.
And that's heavily generational, right? So this discourse on the boomers that has been wrapped up into this whole conversation about agency. It's like, oh, you idiot. You're just blaming the Jews. You're just blaming the boomers. And it's like, well, I don't know, man. I'm never going to get Social Security. When I talk to people who are, they joke about the fact that I'm paying and I'm never going to get it. That doesn't feel like I am making up this excuse to be mad at people my grandparents' age. When we're fighting a war on behalf of another country, it doesn't feel like I just got really, really mad at people who were like that one day for no reason.
Right.
And to be said, again, these are the people themselves talking about agency and responsibility. And so it's like, for my friends, anything. For my enemies, personal responsibility. And I'm sorry if I don't necessarily buy the fact that you're a principled conservative.
Well, you also have to look at the fact that, in your age bracket, I mean, you're still, eligible for a draft. And if they keep going to war for other nations that and engaging in these adventures overseas that do nothing for us as a nation, the amount of recruitment is going to drop sufficiently. How many people are going to voluntarily go to war for another nation, right? And if you drive down the numbers of the military, eventually you will have to bring a draft back. You will not have a choice if you want to continue to expand the empire overseas.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that when we look at this, the neocons like to play fast and loose with the American empire versus the American nation. They speak about them as if they are the same thing. And so they will talk about, we need to, for the sake of America, bomb the Iranians, or, we should have stayed in Afghanistan. But functionally, we're in a zero-sum game between the American nation and the American empire. Mm-hmm. Whenever one is winning, the other is losing. And these people will say, like, oh, are you not patriotic? Do you not care about your country? And the answer is no. I care way more than you do. But I view the nation as being, I don't know, a home for Americans, right? That is its primary usage, to be a place for people like you and me, because, well, we don't have anywhere else. And these wars, to be honest, don't really have any benefit for me. And I honestly do think, and this is probably, unpopular, but if the economy were rip-roaring, if everything was going great, I don't think most people would care at all about fighting in Iran. Mm-hmm. In that hypothetical, people aren't ideological in that way. But when, as we've said, when people are suffering, when people are being forced to make uncomfortable sort of prioritizations, when they're being forced to tighten their belts. Oh, and also we're fighting a war that clearly doesn't do anything for you. It brings that to the fore. And so, you mentioned the fact that more and more people were talking about Israel, that more and more people were, questioning that relationship. One of the things you see coming from, again, this kind of bought and paid for conservative class is they're trying to paint the current conversation about Israel as being kind of synonymous to the campus politics of 10 years ago. And they're like, oh, look at how silly we think the, SJWs were. That's exactly how you're going to feel. And those people didn't go away. They're still in the same positions they were. How many people really got fired by Doge versus how many of them are back? So I think that's a premature celebration. But also, like, this idea is well and truly out of the bag. Like, the idea that we're ever going to go back to, the mid-2000s or the 90s when any sort of conversation about this was relegated to the true fringes, something that you could not talk about. Dude, it's not happening. We were talking about, MMA earlier. And look, like, as a pure show, I thought, the United States, the 250 event was a ton of fun. Like, the fights were great. They had a live band that kind of kicked ass. Like, I'm going to be honest, I'm a sucker for that sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. So putting that aside, what happened there with, current champion Sean Strickland? Well, he gets uninvited for allegedly no reason, but functionally because he'd been calling President Trump a pedophile and saying not crazy stuff, saying very funny stuff about our dearest ally.
He's a wild man.
Well, what did he do? Oh, 100%. He's an interesting synthesis of being a really boring fighter to watch in the ring and a ton of fun out of the ring. Mm-hmm. But you know what? He beat Khamzat, so you know what? As far as I'm concerned, he's basically a saint for delivering us from that. But point is, right? He goes to this event, a sitting champion, an American champion who's been disinvited, and he's in the crowd outside. And sure, this is a crowd of people who are, to be fair, interested in the UFC, but they're thronging around him while he's, again, talking about stuff like this. When I hang out with my buddies, to watch sports or to drink beers or whatever, guys who are not political, and I've said this before on air, so forgive me if there are people in the audience rolling their eyes about this, but like, if someone doesn't pay their tab, or if someone's like, hey, spot me, they become Rabbi blah blah Steen, whatever their name is. Mm-hmm. Right? And sure, that isn't super cerebral. That isn't, a nuanced opinion about our relationship to Israel. That isn't, even particularly political. But it signals that idea is well and truly out of the sacred. You can talk about that now. Mm-hmm. In the same way that, looking back on it, 400 or 500 years later, you and I can talk about the sun being at the center of the solar system and no one cares in the slightest, right? It is no longer a contentious idea. And clearly this issue still is, right? You can get fired from your job. People will try to cancel you from conservative media. But I don't think there's a way to put that cat back in the bag because it is so transparent. It's sort of apocalyptic in the sense of like, an apocalypse, something being made known, the hidden revealed. And I don't know how we go back to, you know, Indies conservatives. Don't know how we go back to, you know, Mike Pence, even if the people want it to happen, just because of that generational divide, because of the fact that people will simply not brook it. And I don't think that means we're going to have, a 1776 revolution. But fundamentally, like, our regime requires a certain amount of legitimacy to it. People have to buy in. People have to believe that the government is legitimate to some degree for it to work.
Mm-hmm.
And while we're talking about the hiring and firing part, I mentioned that earlier. One of the biggest contributing problems is basically that people my age have not been allowed to index with the system. It's just simply, if not impossible, very difficult. So, the number of guys I know who have, I'll just say, jobs with benefits, right? Whatever that is a minority. And okay, you know what? Like, all my friends, middle class kids who went to college, so you'd assume it would be higher than population, but even then, a minority.
Mm-hmm.
The amount of guys I know who have basically been unable to get steady, gainful employment, who are, have technical degrees and they're waiting tables in their mid 20s, who are knocking on the door of 30, still working, gig work.
Mm-hmm.
And again, another thing which does not lead to people being particularly happy with the order that is.
Right.
And the idea that you can paint the sort of numbers we've seen coming from Bloomberg about, the preferential hiring of basically everyone other than white guys since 2020. The sort of lived experience, if I can use that leftist framing of, going to college, of applying to college, when you're like, wait a minute, you said there was an objective standard. I met that standard. I didn't get in.
Mm-hmm.
But wait a minute, that kid did? Again, I don't know how you bring those people back on the plantation when seemingly there's been no effort to fix any of the underlying issues. And so fundamentally, I think we're headed for a very, very unstable situation, because at the same time, what is the direction that the left in America has taken? Well, the energy is on the side of the DSA. They have had their own internal struggle over Israel. It's still happening.
Mm.
But functionally, what is socialism in America? Is it Marxist? I mean, technically, right, if you want to get really autistic about it. But basically, it's ethnic redistribution.
Mm-hmm.
Like Mamdani, he said this. Basically, I'm going to take money from white people and give it to brown people. And, if I were brown, I'd probably vote for that. Like,
yeah,
it makes sense. It's a good deal,
right,
at the very least. And so, assuming that, this Republican Party falters, all of those trends, all of those forces, facing, young radical white men, well, they're only going to ramp up. And the conservative establishment has seemingly no concern whatsoever with reaching those guys, with bringing them into the fold. And so I don't know where that energy goes. Genuinely, I don't know where that energy goes.
When I look at what we're doing today, it makes me remember when I first met my wife, and she was telling me how things in South Africa ran. And this was what, 2012 when we first met. And she was telling me that they have quotas on how many of the doctors in South Africa must be black. And it doesn't matter what their education is or how successful they are in going through their courses. They just have to be black. And that if you don't have insurance in South Africa and you're mitigated to go to one of the state doctors, that your likelihood of getting good treatment is very low, because they don't look at the merit of the doctorate. They're looking at the skin color and the amount of the race that is involved. And I look at what we're doing here now. And, Charlie Kirk had made this comment one time before that if he's getting on a plane, knowing that they have a quota for the amount of black pilots they have to hire, and his pilot happens to be black, he's going to think twice about getting on that plane. wondering if his pilot is actually qualified or didn't just get hired for the color of his skin. Now, people threw that, made a big deal out of that and tried to make him sound racist, but he was actually making a good point that merit does still matter. And that merit has to matter, especially whenever it's a life and death situation, right? You can see what's going on in the trucking industry over the last few years. My buddy, Gordon McGill, a really close friend of mine, has done a really good job of covering these issues about the immigration population coming in, not understanding the laws of the United States and causing all sorts of accidents. There was that famous case in Florida with the guy who was making a U-turn in the middle of the highway and took out a minivan, a family in a minivan, right? And it was all captured on camera, and he didn't even react to it. He was just kind of like, "Oh, okay." Whatever. And you see these videos everywhere with these guys who are going down driving the wrong way on the wrong side of the highway in an 18 wheeler, terrifying people, damn near killing people. And you get this all the time. It seems like it's like at least once a month, there's a massive story that comes out about this. And, and so we have to understand that when we're talking about meritocracy and we're talking about actually understanding the language, actually understanding the laws, actually understanding how America operates, we're doing it for a reason. We're talking about the safety of the next generation, the safety of the families out there, whether they're flying or going to the doctor or being on the road. And we have to be able to talk about that. When you bring up Mamdani, all I ever think about is the ANC. That's all I can see whenever I see Mamdani. It's just he's the ANC. I would love a chance to talk to like William Petzer or somebody like that about the politics of South Africa and their opinions on Mamdani because he spent a lot of his childhood in South Africa. His dad, I believe, was a professor at in Pretoria or Joburg at the university. And they were, into the Marxism and deeply tied to the ANC there in South Africa. But we have to be very careful that the road we're going down, whether it's the tearing down of statues and trying to end history, the quotas based upon race, all these things are leading us down a dark road to which the most dangerous jobs, the most important jobs out there, whether it being a doctor, whether it being a pilot, whether it being a truck driver, all these jobs are being taken up at the lowest skills possible, and it's going to cause a great amount of damage and harm, even more than it has to this point.
Yeah, well, and I think that, and this is not to tease this, but I'm gonna be speaking to Brett Weinstein soon, and I will say I like Brett a lot. I disagree with him on a number of different things, but I think he's an honest man, which is more than you can say for a lot of other people.
He was the professor. His brother's the mathematician, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Point is, he did an absolute banger.
I get them too confused,
show
so I just wanted to make sure
fair.
I knew which one was which.
But the reason I even bring it up, right, is that you hear liberals, and I use that, this is not a slur when I use it in this context, it normally is, but talk about the danger of identity politics, right? Mm-hmm. Talk about how, this is not a situation we want to be in for society, that can promote this kind of tribalism. And fundamentally, my question for people like that is, look, at a certain point, that becomes survival, right? If everyone else is doing that, at a certain point, like, you gotta play it. Like, you gotta play team sports. Like, this is a tortured analogy, but you saw this exact same thing happen, early in the UFC, where it's like, you can complain as much as you want about jiu-jitsu not being real fighting, but fundamentally, in order to win at the game, in order to keep around, you've got to at least understand it, right? Mm-hmm. You've got to at least be proficient at, using that tactic. And so I think that is the realization that, many on the sort of exterior are coming to, of like, well, wait a minute. When I was in school, I was taught that, treating race as anything other than sort of a happenstance of genetics, right? You look one way or the other, was illegitimate. That was off limits. You couldn't do that. And myself and many others have had the slow realization that, well, that system of values was only ever applied to you. You were the only person who was actually playing the game neutrally. Everyone else was playing for keeps. And so at a certain point, whether you think that's a moral way to think or not, people are going to come to the conclusion of, well, if everyone else is doing it, I might as well.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only way to survive. And okay, you can say, I wish that weren't the case. Yeah, sure, I guess I do too. But that is the rules of the game. And I was talking to, it's been, almost a year now, maybe more than that. Jim Jatras, right? Orthodox guy, one of the kind of OG paleocons.
He's a great
writer. And he was talking about the birth of an American ethnos, really, in the sense of there being all of these differences between, Italians and Irish and North and South kind of collapsing. And, sure, I still think the regional thing is a big deal, less so than it used to be. But functionally, when I look at the conversations happening in, younger right-wing circles, they're close to that. They're within spitting distance, at least, of white people viewing themselves as a distinct ethnic group with their own priorities. And yeah, would it be better to have politics based off of things other than race? 100%. But that requires a homogenous society, right? That requires that to be so common it's not useful for politics. It's not a meaningful distinction anymore.
Right.
And when you talk about, the rise of this sort of ANC-esque force, I think that could well provoke that, right? Of very explicit kind of anti-white policies. We've already seen a lot of it, which, let's be honest, has made these sort of conversations more palatable. I mean, Charlie Kirk is a great example. Compare Charlie Kirk in 2024 to Charlie Kirk in 2016, and they're very different on this issue. And, I give him credit for that. But I think that there's this desire from the conservatives to go back. And that's been the case. I mean, and I've said very nice things about Pat Buchanan, but even you see it in him even, where it's he wants to go back to the America of his childhood. He wants to go back to the 50s. And we've seen that exact same dynamic over and over again. And now the conservatives, if they've, I say both, well, some of them have aged, but also we're seeing nostalgia more and more for the 90s or even, the 2000s. They want to put all of these conversations back in the box. They want to stop talking about Israel. They want to stop talking about race. But I think the problem is these issues have become effectively undeniable. I'm sorry, no matter how many graphs you show me, no matter how many times you call me an idiot, I notice that things have gotten more expensive. Mm-hmm. I notice that industries, trucking among them, have been taken over by these ethnic mafias. Mm-hmm. I notice that it's way, way harder for me or even the guys younger than me to get into school than it was for my parents or for my grandparents.
Right.
I bring this up all the time. There's a kid that I know who's, 6 foot plus, captain of the soccer team, good grades, everything. And yeah, he went to college, but he went to what, even when I was applying to school, was your third choice. You're like, oh, well, I know I'll get in there. Well, tears down from where his parents got into, who were, I assume very smart young people, but nowhere near that accomplished. You look at that consistent pattern of downward mobility. You look at that consistent pattern of, to be honest, basically, dispossession. And you say, look, man, I'm not asking for a handout. I'm not asking for free stuff. But this looks like this game isn't fair. This looks like the only thing this machine won't do is let me win. That is just not, a thing that this box does. And so I don't know if you can blame people for basically saying yeah, let's do something else. Let's play another game. Let's pursue something elsewhere. And as kind of an anecdote to that, the amount of energy I've seen going towards building, and whether that's, building small businesses or creating, fraternities or political associations. Dude, it's off the chart. I mean, down to the point where, I get a call from a guy today. And this is a guy who still has a flip phone, right? He is not on the internet in the slightest.
Yeah.
And he wanted my advice because I didn't even realize this, but he basically started a sort of, religious fraternity that's getting really big. And he's like, hey, I know you know a lot of people interested in similar things. What should I do next? And okay, I don't know why he called me. It may not have been his wisest choice. But point is, if those signals have gotten to guys who aren't on the internet, who aren't, terminally online, who aren't following every little bit of news, it seems like the sense in the air, the zeitgeist, the feeling is basically, hey, man, like the system doesn't have anything for me. Like I'm not going to get anything out of this. I need to make something on my own, which is, maybe a very slight silver lining to the clouds we've been talking about this whole episode.
Well, I told my wife, I mean, just on that point in general, I told my wife when we do move back to South Africa, because we eventually plan on moving to South Africa to Cape Town, and when we do, I said I'm getting rid of my phone. I'm not going to have a phone. And she goes, well, what happens if you get lost or if there's an emergency? And I was like, I don't know. What did we do in the 90s? Like, it's like, and you mentioning that that Pat Buchanan, he looks at the 50s. Well, I was having this conversation with my spiritual father earlier today about because he's a 90s kid like I'm a 90s kid. We're both grew up in the 90s. I reference everything based upon that era. Like to me, that was like the golden era. That's what I know of America as. And we were talking about like we're specifically discussing what my children are going through because my kids they range between 21 and 29, and we were talking about the digital age and just the amount of just degeneracy online. And I was like, I don't know when I missed it. Was it when I was sleeping in the cab of in my cab for 12, 13 years driving over the road and I just wasn't paying attention to what was going on in culture that I missed all this stuff happening? And now I wake up and it's like like one out of every four chicks under the age of 25 is on OnlyFans and, showing off her butthole and all that. And I'm just like, what is this? What happened? Like, who hurt you? Yeah. Like, what is going on to make this okay? Because in the world that I know, the world I grew up in, the world I recognize, that wasn't okay. Like the whole trans agenda, pushing it on children, that was never okay. Like that would have gotten you arrested like back in the day. Like you would have been in serious trouble for doing stuff like that.
Well, not even in the 90s, in like 2011.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like not that
wasn't that long ago.
And it's really all of that stuff is such a huge windfall to the conservative movement. Because you can just say like, hey, we're against that. And seemingly a lot of people are like, yeah, fair point, actually. I think I am also against that.
Right.
But when you couple that with, the foreign wars, when you couple that with we're also going to take away your ability to own anything for technically different reasons, or we're going to continue, pumping the country full of H-1Bs. It's like, well, where do you go? And look, I know there are people who are going to be saying like, oh yeah, this is the conclusion I came to decades ago. And fair enough. But actually, what I think is interesting about Trump 2.0 is, in my mind, it was probably the best test for actually fixing the system within the system. Because like if you and I, and shall we say, 2023, sat down with a pen and paper and said, all right, let's go about this project of fixing this, assuming we have a lot of resources, what would you do? Well, you probably would have said, yeah, I think we need to really get a bunch of smart people together, form some kind of organization that's designed to run around the government and smash all the stuff that needs to be smashed, right? Cut it down to the studs. We'll cut. Okay. We're going to need, a flurry of executive orders on all these issues, whether it's birthright citizenship or whatever. And what did we see? Well, one, it didn't seem like it was that big of a priority, even for the guy who was in charge of it. Well, we saw Doge get completely and totally reabsorbed, right? How many of those cuts actually were lasting versus how many of them were for 90 days. And then, we go back to same old. How much does the judiciary just ban the possibility of ever fixing anything ever? And you look at this and you're like, okay, well, that seemingly was the perfect storm. All of the factors aligned, controlled all three, parts of government, had everything. And it didn't work. So, well, does that just mean it's impossible to fix this within the system? And seemingly, yes, seemingly that is the case. And that's not a comfortable thing. Like, it would be nice if the issues facing America, and this is the point from many of these same kind of, conservatives that I mentioned earlier, they think, yep, we can still fix it given the tools built into the system. That the founding fathers were divinely inspired and created this awesome mechanism of, self-reform. Now, I have perhaps a different theological view of what happened there. I imagine you do as well, Tommy. But okay, let's take that at face value. Well, we did it. All of the things aligned. You can't blame all the stuff we blamed the first time around Trump went into office. And did it fix literally anything? No. It seemingly just made it worse.
Yeah.
And so, again, I don't think that looking at that, of calling that pattern out for what it is a lack of agency on my part. I don't think that I'm not enough of a self-starter. I just haven't pulled myself up by my bootstraps hard enough, or I'm looking to blame everything on the nebulous they.
Right.
Like, to me, these are a series of very straight lines of this happened, then this happened. This isn't the protocols of the elders of Zion.
Right.
I'm not mad that, boomers ruined every aspect in my life. I just look at my, Social Security taxes. I just look at,
Right.
the largesse of the government.
There's a saint in the Orthodox tradition that he said, acquire the heart of peace and save thousands around you. And so this is something I've been really looking at whenever I'm going through these books with John Weeks and we're talking. And even when he was interviewing me last night and we were chatting, one of the things I said to him, and I was like, look, I don't have the power to change the institutions. I disagree with like 90% of what the government does. I disagree with all the wars. I don't have the power to change these things. It doesn't mean I'm not going to talk about them and say, hey, look at this and draw some attention to it. But my ultimate priority is to change me, because that's the one thing I do have power over. And it's to move myself into a better spiritual place, closer to God, and to be an example for those around me. My kids, I have 5 children. I have a granddaughter. I have a wife. I have parents. I can make a direct impact in this world, in this circle of people that I engage with on a regular basis. And if you get enough people, you get enough momentum moving in that direction of changing the world around them and changing it for the better, that's when you're going to see the changes. They're going to come from the bottom up, and the government will change, much like how the Apostle Paul did eventually convert the Caesars. Not directly, but he did eventually get the message of Christianity into the politic of Rome. It was done from the bottom up. But he had to change those circles around him, being the apostle and moving forward in that way. I say all that not to preach to people, which some people might accuse me of too much, but to say that what I'm seeing with the growth of the Orthodox faith, what I'm seeing with the growth of like traditional Catholicism, is that move back to those traditional values and that traditional understanding of spirituality and what it actually means and what it's actually intended for, and the way that it changes the world, and it's revolutionary in its roots and in the way that it engages with the world. And we have to be better about understanding that it is our job to bring the church out into the world and not allow the world to infect and invade our churches and begin to change the churches. And that is something that we have to set boundaries on, much like we set the boundaries of the nation, the boundaries around our homes, the boundaries around our relationships. We have to set the boundaries for our churches that we're not going to allow the infections of, the secular world to infect our churches, and that instead we're going to bring the faith and the grace of the church out into the world and watch it spread that way. And until you have that, like I said, we're seeing that occur. We're seeing people come to that realization. Young Gen Z people are coming into the traditional faiths. I'm not one of these debaters that's going to get into the difference between Catholic and Orthodox and blah. I don't care. I'll let other people. Y'all can go watch Alex Soren for that kind of stuff. I'm not doing it. But we're seeing young people want to root themselves in these traditional faiths because they are beginning to understand that the sickness we see around us is spiritual. It is not physical. And that until we fix the spirit of this nation, we're not going to fix the material well-being of this nation. And that's part of what the problem is. And there's not going to be a shortcut.
Yeah, I mean, genuinely, I think that, and there is this sort of repeat pattern, and you see it in both scripture and kind of our own political history, that bad times can create a spiritual strength that plenty does not. And so, look, I think that if you're a betting man, you have to bet on things getting worse. But that might not be the worst thing long term, right? That might be a sort of necessary medicine. And yeah, okay, given the choice, if I could, wave a magic wand and gift America the economy of 1996 or 1956, yeah, 100%, I would. That would be directionally better. But look, the economy being bad, political privation, those are things that people like us, whether on a religious or a cultural level, have overcome before. And so I think that there's this desire to be a sort of prophet of doom, right? Mm-hmm. To say, it's all over, the end is nigh. And who knows, it may be. I'm not entirely convinced. But the idea that it is an end, that it is all over, that's not true, right? People have survived much, much worse. Again, given the choice, I'd prefer not to have to be in that, framing of endurance or that framing of kind of, overcoming. But, you don't get to pick when you're born. Right. It is very much, how you respond to the cards dealt to you. And yeah, I mean, I think that presents an incredible opportunity, because if you look at a lot of the people who have created the situation we're in, it's easy to talk about how, boomers are out of touch. It's easy to talk about how they're unrealistic, that they don't understand how the world works. Some of that's age, okay? But I think another part of it is basically growing up in, the craziest increase in personal wealth and autonomy in human history, mm-hmm. right? They got to, ride the roller coaster. And I think it's important that, we don't look at that and say, oh, I wish I was the boomer. Mm-hmm. I wish I had been able to do all of that. Because, and not all, of course, this is the broadest generalization about millions of people at one time. But you look at that experience and it's like, okay, well, it did make you wealthy, but it also made many of these people spiritually impoverished. Mm-hmm. And so, I think it's important to say, like, despite all of these complaints about the economy, these complaints about the material framework, that is not the determinant factor in having a good life, which, to be fair, however cynically, is something that, you hear many of these conservatives say. And they're not wrong. It's just they're not giving you that advice with good intention. Right. They're not saying that so that you can make yourself better. They're saying that to you so you can shut up. Yeah. And that does not, impoverish the individual advice, of course. It's just important to understand why someone's saying that. In the same way that, well, pulling yourself up by your bootstraps is actually the best, personal advice, at least immediately. It's just, I think that for many people, it's hard to hear it because it is so often wrapped in that sort of, to be honest, contempt or hatred that we identified earlier.
Right.
And so, yeah, man, I think that we're generally in alignment on that point.
Well, they've made it, they've created a situation to where it's, you have very few pathways nowadays, right? So it wasn't that long ago. I mean, 50 years ago, my grandfather was the sole income of the house. They owned their own home. They had land, not a lot, but like 5 acres. Two working vehicles, raising 3 children, right? And this was just in the 70s. It wasn't that long ago. And they've devastated the economy to such a degree that that just seems like an impossibility or a rarity at this point, in that there are so few pathways to get to that point, right? I mean, he worked in the plants down in Sulphur, Louisiana, PPG. He worked there for, I don't know, 30, 40 years, retired, from there. And it's just some of those, that economic availability, those types of positions, those types of jobs are not available. I actually encouraged my kids not to go to college. I was like, I wouldn't do it. And I have one son, he's going to trade school and he's working as an electrician's apprentice. He wants to be an electrician. Good. There's not going to be any shortage of work for him. I got another son that's doing concrete work around the state of Texas, making decent money, in his 20s. He travels a lot. He's not in one place for a long time, but he's single. He's young. He can afford to do it. And he sticks with it. He'll become a supervisor, before he's 30 and making good money and carrying out contracts for the state of Texas. There's nothing wrong with that. You need these positions, you need these jobs, and there are ways that you can carve out a path for yourself, but it is not the traditional way that people want to tell you. This is, you must go to college, you must do this, study the humanities, whatever. Like, yeah, you're just going to end up working at Subway. And you're wondering, you're like, oh, I'm $120,000 in debt. I have a master's degree in feminist, like, basket weaving or whatever, and I'm working at Subway for, $14 an hour. Like, what happened here? And it's like, you were lied to, just plain and simple. And that coming to that realization that you've been lied to about your potentiality, about what awaits you out there in the world, that will make anyone angry. And so I'm not even saying they don't have the right to be angry. Like, as far as I'm concerned, like, yes, you do have the right to be angry, but you have to learn to focus that energy in the right directions. Because if you don't, it's just going to be as unproductive as the results you've had to this point.
Definitely. And I mean, I think that, there is a lot of legitimate anger, but there is definitely a problem with people kind of stewing on that and identifying with that in a certain way. Now, look, like, another common critique is people say, like, oh, you're engaging in grievance politics, the politics of grievance, which is like, look, man, that's how everything works. Like, the American founders said, hey, we've got a set of grievances. They, they wrote it down somewhere. You may be familiar with it, but I look at specifically groups, like self-identified incels, not in a slur sense, but, guys who are really torn up around the relationship between the sexes. And I get it. Many of their complaints about family courts, many of their complaints about, the relations between the sexes are entirely fair, legitimate, and real.
Right.
But you look at that culture and you're like, that's not going to fix it. That's not really a solution there. Mm-hmm. That's basically a pity party.
Right.
And so if we're talking about, possible dangers, possible pitfalls, I mean, I do think there is a chance of sort of creating from first principles a sort of like white Jesse Jackson, you know, of kind of re-engineering exactly the same kind of dysfunction that
Right.
we've seen elsewhere. Now, I wouldn't necessarily put that as my kind of top line concern, but you do see that pattern, right? There are ways to mitigate that. And telling someone, yeah, you know, this is going to get tough. I'm not in charge. I can't fix it is maybe not the most fun thing, but like it is real, right? It does make things better.
Right. How are you on time?
I got to run relatively soon. I have enough time to wrap it up, but yeah, sorry, man. I've got to
No, no, that's
dash my
fine.
way.
You brought up incels, so that made me think of the UFC. So I thought we could talk about the incels of the UFC. But no, that's fine. Let's wrap it up.
But fair, dude, we should do just a straight up MMA show. I did one a while back where I brought on a great writer, the guy who runs the Chivalry Guild, who has a great book I've got somewhere around here. Fully intending to have a conversation, and I just ranted about how much I hate TKO and how I felt really bad for Conor McGregor for like an hour and a half. Barely let him get a word in edgewise. So, point is, if you and I want to go down there, we've got some material.
Yes. Yeah, we'll have to set that up. We'll definitely do that. Maybe after this horrible fucking show that's coming up. Oh God.
Well, dude,
330
here's what
looks
I'll
so
say.
bad. 330 looks so
It
bad, dude.
does.
I'm just like, come on. I was like, I understand y'all like had to stack International Fight Week, and then you had the White House card where you stacked up all these great fights. But man, 330, you have one good fight. That's it. And I'm pretty sure that Islam versus Ian Gary is going to be boring. I mean, because
Yeah,
Ian
well, and
Gary is
I'll
one of the
put it
most
this way:
boring fighters.
it takes a lot, like really a lot, for me to root for the Russian Muslim guy. Like that's pretty close to my first rule of MMA, which is who am I rooting for? Whoever isn't, a guy with a beard and a bowl cut, right? But Ian Gary's done it. You have to give him
Yes.
credit. And it's not just the fact that he's an incredibly boring fighter. He's also uniquely insufferable.
He's
And so
retarded.
I am going to watch it. I know I am. But I'm going to hate myself the whole time. And I think I was at least texted you before or after the last card. I don't know why I keep doing this to myself. Because I look at it, I'm like, that's going to be trash. And then 48 hours later, I'm watching it. I'm like, I knew this was going to be trash. And then when it's done, I'm like, this was trash. And I'm mad at myself throughout the whole thing. So basically, what I'm saying is this is an abusive relationship, but I'm pretty sure Dana still loves me.
Yeah. Well, 333 should be good. So we got that
Yeah,
coming up.
really.
And what's that, October, I think. 333 looks like it's going to be good. It's going to be Volk versus Evloev and Jan versus Davalishvili 3. So that should be a good one.
Oh, that is going to be good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm. Oh,
Oh, and they just
all
announced
right, I'm excited again.
yeah, they just announced a fight for 332. Talbot is fighting Figueredo.
Yeah,
So he's
yeah,
so
that'll be a good fight.
Figueredo's gonna get his freaking career ended finally. I hope.
I was really impressed by Talbot's win over Cejudo.
Mm.
Uh, Now, obviously, Cejudo's not to say washed is probably an aggressive term, but he's been on the decline for
Yeah,
a
he's
while.
older, and then he
Uh,
retired for 3 years, and he came back. I mean, like those things. It's like expecting McGregor to beat Max Holloway, right? It was like, even if that fight would have gone into round two, McGregor wasn't winning that
or
fight.
yeah,
It's like there was no way
but
McGregor
point
was
is,
beating
I thought
Holloway.
Talbot looked really good. Particularly his wrestling looked very good.
Right.
But all I'm going to say is the fighter I've had the most fun watching in the last couple years on the come up has been Kill and Skull Killed. An like even by the standards of the UFC, very difficult name for me to say. But his most recent win was very, very impressive. And I mean, he's had great power. His grappling has, again, been not to say unexpectedly good, but you see a new up-and-comer who has a flashy KO, and you're like, all right, I've seen this one before. But, yeah, his last fight was an incredibly dominant performance. And here is the UFC matchmaking I want to see, just because I think it would be fun, but they'll never do it because it would be fun. He is ranked just under Pimblett now. Mm-hmm. And Pimblett's loss to Gaethje has aged very, very well.
Very well.
Now, Pimblett is not an incredible striker. To say his hands are bad is probably an understatement, but he's a very talented grappler. We've seen that proven, multitude of times.
Dude, that submission he got, I think that would be a fun fight. Nasty.
Yeah. Yeah, like this crazy, like anaconda Peruvian necktie.
He called it the pad thai.
You're just... That's good. I like that.
It was awesome.
Yeah, that's also funny because I had just gotten into a conversation with one of my buddies where he'd basically, to be fair, he's much better at jiu-jitsu than I am, so take this for what it's worth. Where he basically said that the Peruvian necktie was fake, and not to say that it didn't work, but functionally it never happens.
Right.
And then 12 hours later, I'm like, look at it. Yeah, see, I told you. Now, does that change how that fight works out between me and him as it happened literally this morning? No, I still get dog walked, but,
That's funny. I want to, what I was thinking of? I was thinking the other day when I was driving after Sal killed one, and I was like, I want to see, number one, Australia was a prison island, and I want to know who Sal was, because someone in his family killed Sal. So I want to know who Sal was. And number two, I think Sal killed versus Hooker in Perth would be the biggest freaking thing you could do.
That would be, look, I slightly worry that we're into that the Dan Hooker's had a rough couple fights, and just knowing, again, parasocially, but the Dan Hooker persona, he has the potential to have a very nasty end of career.
Yes.
Because clearly that man has no concept of quitting. And so I slightly worry that, he turns into sort of a Tony Ferguson-esque figure where you're just like, please, I don't want to remember you like this.
Stop.
Just retire.
Just stop. Have you seen he's doing those 1-minute fights?
Yeah, they're great. It's like the best thing on the internet.
It's amazing. But yeah, no, I love Dan Hooker. I remember when they booked him to fight Justin Gaethje last year, I was so excited. And then he broke his hand and he had to have surgery, so he had to back out. I was like, oh my God. They asked Dan Hooker, why do you think they booked you versus Justin Gaethje? And he's like, because they want to see someone die in the octagon.
Fair. I will say, and have for a long time, loved Justin Gaethje so much.
Yeah.
And I saw this comment after 250, which might be one of the greatest Cinderella stories of the 21st century. Just such an amazing.
I wanted him to retire.
Everything about it.
I wanted him to put his gloves down and be like, I did it.
And it was that photo of him where he's in the Oval Office looking at the Constitution or the Declaration on the wall.
Oh yeah.
And it was just
during his walkout,
2 lines transcribed over it, and it just said, "On paper, Topuria wins, but Justin Gaethje can't read." And I thought that was the perfect take on it.
That's amazing. That's one thing I do miss about X. I don't see all the memes.
That's not worth it. But that was just one of those ones.
That's a good one though.
Yes. I wish I would have said that.
Yes, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. I love it. All right, man. Well, plug what you got to plug. We'll continue our MMA talk some other time. Maybe after we have a good card, we'll just do a review. Maybe we can get
yeah, we should.
Maybe we can get MMA Guru to join us. That'd be fun. That dude's a blast, dude.
The one positive development in MMA in the last year and a half, and we're scraping to find this, is seemingly they've basically forgotten about women's MMA. Like,
Oh
if you
God.
look at the frequency of it, it has dropped off a
Mhm.
roof, and I'm not complaining
I'm not either.
at all.
Yeah.
Your quality of life goes up if you just pretend that women's MMA in the heavyweight division doesn't exist, except for Josh Hockett. And if you just make that decision, the
Josh Hockett
quality
is
goes
hilarious.
dramatically up. I kind of hate him and love him in equal parts. Like, I do.
The first time I
It's
saw him
so
on,
obviously put on.
speaking of which, the Contender Series starts tonight. So,
Oh, you are
but
more dedicated than I am.
yeah.
Someone will send me a clip if anything is worth watching.
Well, the
Dana
first
White
time I saw
Contender Series.
Hockett was on the Contender Series last year, and I was like, "What does this guy think he's like Macho Man? Like, what the hell is happening here?" And
Apparently.
but what is the one he does where it's the Hispanic, the Cholo? Oh my God, that is so funny. And when he was intentionally bombing his stand-up routine in front of the press, I was dying. But yeah,
I
he
will
is a
say
funny
that
dude.
his fight with Curtis Blades, it's not quite as good as that classic. Was it Dan Severn Yoshihiro? I cannot remember the name of the Japanese guy who's fighting with, where they just grab each other by the scruff of the
Oh,
neck. We just had the 25th anniversary of it,
wasn't
but
that
that was
Don
about as
Fry?
close to that fight as anything of it. Yeah, it was Don Fry
Don
and some
Fry.
Japanese dude.
Yeah, I can't
But
remember the Japanese guy's name, but yeah.
but that Hockett Blades fight was about as close to
That was awesome
that
fight.
much concentrated violence,
Yes.
where it's just like two big old dudes doing exactly the same two punches into each other's faces for an uninterrupted 15 minutes. And you're like, you know what? I realize this isn't the intellectual take, but this rocks.
Yes.
Like, this is awesome.
It was a great fight. That was so much fun. And those fights are fun, man. They just throw technique out the window and just start beating the hell out of each other. I love it. I love watching like the real like technical guys. They're fun to watch too, but when people just throw technique out of the window and it turns into a brawl, I started watching MMA in 1994. So that's what
Oh,
I
wow.
started watching Tank Abbott, right? Like that was when I started watching,
Yeah.
So I love that shit. It's a bar brawl. I love it. But
Yeah,
yeah,
it's great TV. Well, dude, Tommy, thank you so much for having me. This was a
a-
blast, man. And yeah, I'm
absolutely,
looking
man.
forward to getting that MMA show on the books.
Yeah, we'll definitely do that. We'll have to figure out time to do that. That would be a lot of fun. Plug away, plug where people can find you and
Oh,
what
yeah,
you're
yeah, yeah.
doing.
Jay Burden Show. I do interviews. I do solo stuff. You can find that anywhere you listen to podcasts on YouTube. I write for Chronicles Magazine every once in a while. If you want to read it, you can read me there. And yeah, I think that's everything.
All right, brother. Well, I will stop this recording.